All right, Tansei, okay. My name is Kurt. It's my English name. The Blackfoot name gifted to me is Ikatape, which translates to courageous person. Um, I am from George Gordon First Nation, which is a Cree Nation in Saskatchewan, what is now modern-day Saskatchewan, in Treaty 4 area. I've been a very grateful visitor here on the Blackfoot ancestral lands for 32 winters now. And so I did a lot of healing, a lot of reckless living, but very grateful for the journey to be on these lands. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and where I'm from.
What brought you to Mohkinstsis?
What brought me, I had originally come to Kananaskis for a job. And so I just kind of came through Calgary, went up to Kananaskis where I worked. And I lived up there until I got booted out for, those reckless behaviors, And then I hitchhiked to Vancouver. And so I stayed in Vancouver for 3 months, kind of just couch surfed, floated around, lived that life, right? And then when I hit a kind of a dead end there and I knew winter was coming, I thought I got to get somewhere where I know where I'm going to have a safe place to sleep. So I hitchhiked back on December 1st, and I got here December 2nd, and my aunt lived here. And so little did I know that my mother was actually planning to move from Saskatchewan on that same day. So she came here on December 2nd. I was here on December 2nd. And that's how I came here. And then we stayed here, We moved up to the northeast and we called it home. Called it home ever since. That's how I got here.
That's a crazy journey.
Yeah, it's a little bit longer than that, but we'll stick with that one. That's the short version. But my home is always Gordon's back in Treaty 4 there, That's where where your heart is, as you know where your heart is. I watch your Instagram posts, and I just you and your mother paint these beautiful pictures of culture, and even as a spectator, I feel that longing to be back on that land, right? And around those traditions. So whenever I see that, it calls me back home too. It's like face the east and just.
Has it been a while since you've been back home?
I go home at least once a year to either engage with the community at our gatherings for powwows, if I'm called home for other reasons, for celebration of life, or and whatever that looks like, right? But mostly it's been once a year. Last year I went into Treaty 6. So I grew up in Treaty 6 as well, in Saskatoon area. And so I was back and forth all summer, out to Treaty 6 all summer, as I engaged with other communities, Montreal Lake, Muscadet, Gordon's, I can't remember where else, but yeah, so I went there with the intent to engage more with community in the different levels, Montreal Lake is Woodland Cree, I am Plains Cree. And so just seeing those differences and seeing how the ways of life are different. It's very way up north in Saskatchewan. I'm closer to like Regina, Saskatchewan, which is where our lands are. And so there's a great difference.
Not a lot of people would know that, Like Cree would be kind of like an umbrella term.
Cree is, probably just like Inuit is. And that's one thing a lot of us are really trying to talk about now, is how we're a community within a community. Like like Indigenous is just that umbrella word, right? We're not all the same. We have our own ways of governance. We have our own ways of worldviews based on the land, right? Based on the elements, based on location and placement, right? And so it's I like that when people have that conversation and ask, so there is Woodland Cree, and then there's Plains Cree, but there's also Plains Cree that were displaced and put up, like in northern Alberta here, in Frog Lake and Onion Lake, things like that. Then there's Muscatcheese, and that's Cree, and so OG Cree. Creefoot, Blackfoot and Cree, but that's not really a thing. That's kind of like because so many Crees and Blackfoots made it up, So just those diverse communities within that, and then even what that looks like within the Plains Cree Society, right? Where you were, which medicines you picked. There's a lot of commonalities amongst us, right? But always so super diverse. And it's always good to have those conversations. And
How do you think we deconstruct that monolith view?
through information, I think through forums like this, through the younger voices as well, right? You know, who are really exploding out. And now that we have these things called social media, right? And there's more exposure and there's that opportunity in a holistic, organic way to share that, right? Like this, we're sharing this now. This is how we're sharing that information. And once we recognize that diversity within ourselves, whether we're reconnecting or whether we're reawakening, rather, I don't really like reconnecting because it's where we were always there. Reawakening that spirit, so coming back to culture, right? And then identifying, going, oh yeah, so we're, and then telling our non-Indigenous allies and non-allies alike, right? It's like, well, we're just as diverse as you, and using empathy for that, you know. For example, I would talk to somebody who's maybe comes from Germany, and I'll say in Germany, there are many different tribes, right? There are many different ways, and allowing them to figure that out for themselves and go, oh yeah, I said, well, that's the same for us. We're very many different populations, right? Within that umbrella term of Indigenous. And so it's a government term. It's a term that is acceptable by most nations, and it's just it makes it easier, I believe, for non-Indigenous people and maybe Indigenous people too to be recognized, to be seen as a distinct society, right? And so yeah, so that's for me. It's through social media, through having those conversations, in however it occurs. Maybe something that's not effective is hammering people down with it. If they don't want to know, that's okay, don't know. But recognize when someone comes to share that information. And so, yeah, I use my voice, but I generally do it in person. Like if I'm doing one of my talks, then I'll talk about that, and I'll talk about all the differences, and just put it as part of that, but not letting it be the focus. Just be aware that, you know, even in that introduction, a grateful visitor to these ancestral lands, right? It's always being mindful of our Blackfoot hosts, and that shows. Oh, that starts the conversation. What do you mean you're a visitor here? I thought this was all your land. And so it opens up that dialogue, right? That avenue for dialogue. So yeah, that's a great question.
So what does it look like when you're engaging with community?
Well, I do it in many different ways. I do it through education. I do it through my work. I do it through just walking into a room. But when I'm engaging with Indigenous community, that could be at school. I have a lot of opportunities to engage with many speakers, many elders, access to ceremony, and creating space for myself for ceremony, celebrations, whether that be something like traditional and non-traditional powwows, feasts, round dances, that sort of stuff, just being comfortable with it now. It wasn't always the case, right? It wasn't always the case for me. And but now just getting comfortable and saying, yeah, I'm enough to be there. I'm enough to be there. So I'm gonna celebrate with my community. And so that's some of the ways I do it, through school, through work. The work I do is with people who are at risk or are currently actively experiencing unhoused, no fixed address, maybe dealing with some disruptions in their wellness, and that could look like addiction or other what the English would call disorders, right? And so that's where a lot of my work goes. And so because we're not highly represented in the field, but we're represented in the populations that are served by the field, right, that assist in that healing. So if I walk into a room, like the first day I walked into my current employer, which is the Calgary Drop-In Center, I walked in, and within minutes, a young Indigenous man, a Cree, by the way, had walked up to me, and he says he's just on his own healing journey, eh? And the first thing he wanted to know was, do you know where I can get some medicines to smudge with? Do you know if I can get access to an elder? And that sort of thing. And just when I say I walk into a room, so I'm what you would call an assuming Indigenous person, right? Not to take away from our non-assuming fair-skinned kin, right? But when they see somebody that looks more traditionally like them, there's that sense of somebody that it takes a little bit of the weight off, where most times in any kind of healthcare setting, it's predominantly white, right? It's predominantly or other, not a lot of us out there. And so that's one way. I really love engaging with community. One of the things I love about the work that I do is just seeing someone that looks like me and just assisting in that healing journey, right? And also my healing journey, because we're exchanging that energy, right? So yeah, I hope that answered. If that made sense. Sometimes I hear myself, did that make sense at all?
No, it did. What did your healing journey look like?
Wow. So it really has to go back to, so I've been here 55 winters. I've been on this plane for 55 winters. And what I remember growing up was happy up and when I was a kid, right? Not realizing, kids don't know if they're in poverty. I mean, maybe they go hungry, something like that, but they don't know that word. But they do remember the love that they had in their community, right? And I had that. And then I was taken to residential school where I lived for 10 years. And that in itself is a whole other story, right? A lot of trauma, a lot of emotional, physical, spiritual, and physical trauma, right? So that's really where, when I talk about my healing journey, it is not complete without starting from the beginning. Because once I came here, everything that happened on this journey led up to what we most commonly known as the healing journey, and we can call that when I put down that last drink, right, October 28th, 2018. But that journey was happening the whole time, right? There was always something, even though there was some truly horrible wounds being acted out in real life, right? But that to me was also, now I can see that as a form of healing. But my sober journey, my sober healing journey began on that day, on October 29th, 2018. I had struggled for 35 years after I left residential school. I went right into what we now can see are the impacts of those places, right? The erasure of culture, the erasure of the genocide on our emotional well-being and our everything, all those 4 states of being, right? And so I would say that's, I started asking some really, I guess, manifestations or questions to the universe, with stress responses, or what we call triggers and trauma. Came a lot of suicide attempts. And so after many attempts and not succeeding, in 2007, I finally said, well, if you're not good at something, you may as well stop, right? And so that was when I started asking that question. Why am I still alive? Like, there's no way I should have been alive. Instinct, guidance, whatever kept me alive. And so I asked, why am I still here? I have a role to play, but what is it? And why am I still alive? And so I remained in addiction for another 11 years, right? But I always asked that question, like that could have ended badly, right? That could have ended one of two ways, right? But I'm still here, so why? And so when I got sober, that question started taking on a whole new meaning, right? It's like, why am I here? Why am I still alive? What is that role that is for me? And so with sobriety came an opening up of spirit, if I could call it that. I didn't have the weight of substances really colluding my spirit and my four states of being, right? So things started opening up. My brain started healing, which was the first part. My body and my brain started healing. And so I was more open to seeing the messages. And then, sure enough, they started coming through, eh? But it wasn't that simple always. I mean, there was a lot of anger that was built up. And that was a very crucial part of that healing journey, was recognizing and acknowledging the anger and why it existed. Because it was always going to keep me in a space of darkness if I did not try to find it. So around, I got sober. My first sober day was October 29th, 2018. Now, my father, I was able to have that experience with my father, who was also an addict, a former addict, dependent on those substances for many years of his life as well, right? And so I got to be with him for 13 months, having conversations, right? And once he joined the spirit world, that's when the questions really started being answered. And I'm not saying it was just Dad, but that's when I started noticing the signs to those questions. What is my role? What is my responsibility? Why am I still alive? And so I always call it a Rubik's Cube. And what is it, 6 sides, 5 sides, whatever? And for me, it was always and it's ongoing. It's going to be a Rubik's Cube that never completely ever until I join my ancestors, right? Our ancestors over there. And so those messages started coming through signs, through people crossing my path, through maybe making healthier goals, but also asking that question. Because when my father passed, I had 13 months sobriety. And then an event happened where that anger came back. I was a very violent person in addiction, eh? I was all those things to my former partner rather. And just in society, my reaction was always quick and swift and violent. And so after 13 months, around the 16th month, an event had happened where that behavior presented itself. And I just like, holy fuck, like, I'm sober now, I should be fixed. Why aren't I fixed? I thought that was the answer. And it's like, why am I here? What do I have to do, right? You have to acknowledge that anger. Where is that anger coming from? And so I really had to go back. I had to go back to being a little boy. I had to go back to and just recognize and stop taking responsibility for everything that happened in that school, right? Because that's what you typically do. When you're defenseless, you try to find power in different avenues. And so I took responsibility that I deserved that I wasn't worthy of anything less. But when I got out of there, the reaction was anger. But I didn't know why I was angry. But it was presenting itself, and that was the stress response, right? That was trauma. That was my trauma response, was anger. And so, as part of that healing journey, I started coming across these messages, right? And I'll share this one really quick. in case it's helpful to anybody who might be listening today, as it was one of the things that really helped me. And what started me on that journey towards healing from anger was I was reading this book. Someone had gifted my former partner had gifted me this book, and it was Oprah Winfrey's Soulful Sundays, and in it they cover great philosophers, great philosopher minds of this century, spiritual leaders, just the voices of this century. And in each section is divided up into ego, anger, spirituality, and so on. And so when I was asking that question, why am I so angry? Why am I so angry? I was just really manifesting for some time. What's going on there? And so I came across this part in this book, and it had said, I believe it was Eckhart Tolle. And he's sharing this story about two former prisoners of war. And this is many decades later. They are old men now. And they had a reunion. And so prisoner of war one says to the other, "Have you ever forgiven our captors for what they did to us?" And prisoner of war two says, "No. I'll hate them till the day I die. I'll never forgive them." And then number one says, "Then you never left that prison." I never left that school. And until I found a way to acknowledge everything that happened there, I was never going to stop being angry. So I had to go through that journey of forgiveness. I had to go through that. And it was hard. It wasn't simple. It wasn't overnight. I still have to find ways to forgive, right? But I can do it. I can manage that better now with a clearer head, a clearer spirit. And through the grace of Creator and community, it makes it manageable, if that makes sense. And so not only that, I went into a program called the Smart Recovery Program that helps uses cognitive behavioral therapy and rational emotive behavioral therapy to switch how you respond. Whereas you got so comfortable and so complacent with reacting from someone who is in addiction with that mindset, right? Fear, anger, shame, all that. So you really respond that way. So when you switch it into a healthier response and you take that moment through these tools to go, question it, question the behavior. Why the behavior? Then it changes. It changes the conversation. So being mindful was a big part of that. So while I was going through that journey, I was working in a field in the liquor industry, but I got tired of seeing others who were struggling with that darkness, right? Living in addiction, and I got tired of seeing that because I was about 2.5 years sober, 2 years sober, and I thought they were comfortable talking about me and asking me about how I got sober. And I thought there's got to be something more, right? So I set a goal to get out of that business. And through that goal setting, I ended up, long story short, at Bow Valley College in the Addiction Studies Diploma Program, which also had what that term then, Aboriginal focus. And so as I was searching for a connection back to community, as I was very separated, I was very out of step with even my own identity, right? A lot of shame, a lot of internalized racism. And so I really wanted to learn more about why, what is our history? So when finding that program, the addictions program with the Indigenous focus program, combined for this beautiful relationship that started to take form. So I went there, and within the first year, I had gotten hired at Sunrise Healing Lodge, which is a recovery from substances disorder, and it uses traditional cultural and spiritual healing methods alongside 12-step. And so I was really interested in that, and that was a manifestation as well. I was continuing that journey of cultural connection and just trying to dig deeper. So I worked there, and so that's where I began my work in the field of addictions and mental wellness, right? And assisting those on their journey. And so I was there for just over a year, and then as I alluded to about signs, about manifesting and looking for signs, I started a conversation with a man who works at the drop-in center, and so just through conversation, not actively seeking a role, not actively seeking a job, I now found myself working at the Calgary Drop-In Center, hands-on with things where I can enhance my learning a little bit deeper, eh? They have a very interesting program over there. So I work casually as a peer support worker over there in a detox and withdrawal management, a new program that they have over there. And also I'll be taking on a role as in an opioid response team. So in a medical services field. And so that's the type of work I do, is assisting Indigenous and non-Indigenous people as they go through that journey, whatever their needs are, whatever they identify as their needs. Do I want to go to treatment? Do I want to look for more cultural connection? Do I need housing? Do I need food security? So just helping them navigate with their permission, and they're based on their needs, not what I think they need, right? And so that's where I find myself right now. And it's an extension of not only the volunteer work that I did for outreach on the street, but also at the Calgary Drop-In Center. And so this is where I find myself professionally at the moment. What the future looks like now is I'll be finishing my what could you call it, your paid learning over at Bow Valley College, where I spent another year getting some third year credits. I'm hoping to get into a program over at the University of Calgary that is land-based Blackfoot teachings and approaches to wellness. So my goal is to find a way to braid systems of knowledge, right? How do we braid the medical services, Western medical services, and the way they approach addiction and mental wellness with traditional knowledge? Because there has to be something better, right? There has to be something more organic and more holistic and more land-based to assist our people through that healing journey. And it's something that helped me, was that call back to culture, that call back to land and ceremony was one of the things that assisted me and continues to do so, right? But seeing as how substances and addiction were introduced to us through the settler and colonial violence, we now have to find ways to combine the two. And even further than that, what does it look like from other cultures, right? What does it look like from a Buddhist culture? How can we integrate for better, more positive and healthier outcomes that are not based on maybe something that is Christian values? And I'm not going to name the program, but it's a very prevalent program that they use here in North America and worldwide, and I don't knock it, there's value in it. But something else has to be out there for us as Indigenous people, right? Just something more holistic. So that's where my work is, and that's where I see it going currently. But as I ask those questions, what is my role? And I ask it every day when I smudge. What is my role? Where am I to be? This is where I'm to be today with my friend Braden and Mr. Ernie here. And so I was called to this for whatever reason, right? And that's one of those signs.
How has your healing journey influenced the work you do?
The works, the healing journey in two ways. I use the SMART program and also cultural teachings. I also use that book, right? Well, we'll just name it. It's the 12-step book, eh? I am fluent in it, but it's not a program that I use. I use maybe a couple steps here and there. But when I share, when I assist somebody, I try to use some of the teachings that may be applicable to the conversation that I'm having with an individual or individuals. I got called into work a couple of weeks ago, and I had to do some groups, facilitate some groups. And so because I use the medicine wheel model and in my everyday life, but also in my healing process, that's what I shared with. So how does my healing process, which is the medicine wheel through SMART, I used those tools, that systems of knowledge, to share with this group. And so the feedback was from others that they'd never thought of it that way, of those 4 states of being. So the way I approached my healing journey, my recovery, was something that I shared with them, and so largely non-Indigenous people, but they got a lot out of it, just going, oh. And it's one thing I always tell people is, as was something that was shared to me, right, was just take the best of take what's working. Take what's working and put that in what they call the toolbox, right? And so for me, that's what's working for me is medicine wheel, cultural teachings, time with elders, time in ceremony. And I'll share that. That's how I came to the Calgary Drop-In Center. I was asked by the Aniquicon Center at the Bow Valley College in June of last year to be an escopies for a Blackfoot elder. Escopies being a Cree word. I don't think they use it in Blackfoot, but assistant to the elder. And so we were going over to share knowledge on medicines and making partnerships and making treaties with our neighbors in the neighborhood. And so that's how I went over there. And that's how the conversation started. To be quite honest, the Calgary Drop-In Center was one of 2 places I said I would never work. And now look at where I am. I was called there, right? Where am I supposed to be on that day? What is my role? And so that's a really good example of how my healing journey, which is cultural and spiritual reawakening, influences my work and my approach. And I'd like to think that I'm an embodiment of that, but also a person who's still learning and who will never stop learning. So anything I have a responsibility now to share that with someone else, because a lot of elders that I've met are in long-term recovery as well. And so they share that knowledge in a way that is transferable as we go along. So their work influences my work so that's all part of that healing journey that goes into my work. And it's important to note that I'm healing alongside with them. Whenever I interact with an individual, I always take something as well, and I learn something about them, which I can apply to how I manage and work within my healing journey, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah?
How has your work been received by community?
How has it been received by community? That there's a need. It is identified as a need, that we need more. And in particular, we see in these fields, we see a lot of women, right? In social work, in psychology, and all those, always those helping fields is predominantly women. So we don't see a lot of men on that side unless they're doctors or unless they're in those positions of what we would call power, right? Management and so forth. But we don't see a lot of men on that front line. And we see even less Indigenous men on that front line. So as a Cree person, as an Indigenous man, the two spirit as well, to be how was my work received in community? As we need more. How can we get you? How can we amplify this voice? How can we amplify Indigenous voices through this? And so I'm always actively trying to recruit or talking about how we can get more Indigenous men into this field, because we didn't have a lot of healthy role models, right? And particularly we didn't have a lot of Indigenous male role models that were not identified to maybe some toxic masculinity. And so that's not really going to help in the healing process, right? That's going to just maybe take it back a little bit. So as an Indigenous person, as an Indigenous male, and as Indigenous two-spirit person, I have been very welcome. My presence is welcome in the communities that I've interacted with. I have not met resistance yet, though I do hear that there is, particularly towards individuals who identify as two-spirit. But I have not. I have, in this field, I just feel like community says, we need more. How can we get more? So, well received.
What does it mean to you to receive that support?
So, having grown up in the 70s and 80s in the reserve system where there was a lot of lateral violence, and I left my reserve at 15 and full of shame, full of resentment, full of just like, I'm done. Like I was so done with being a First Nation person. And so that's why that really contributed to that addictive behavior and that disconnection, right? That straying away from my spirit and my calling. And so when I got sober, and when I started creating space and taking space for myself, I really had to reconcile. I really had to reconcile a lot of that hurt, forgiveness of self. And so I had to really reconcile a lot of those things to go back home, and I still face that. Sometimes I just don't feel like I'm enough, right? I don't feel like I don't have long hair, I don't have this, and started measuring myself against others, which is a negative behavior. It's not just accepting for what I am, how Creator made me. So from when I go into community, I really have to sometimes push myself a little bit harder and to really face that fear and and identify where that fear comes from and go, okay, but remember, you belong, you are enough, you're enough. You just get in there and you go, even though you're scared. Sitting at a drumming, right? It still feels a little uncomfortable, but it's so familiar. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, yeah.
You hear those drums. You grew up with those drums. We hear it in the heartbeat and when we're inside our mothers, right? We grew up hearing those drums. So even when I was in addiction, every time I heard those drums, doom, 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 I was always called. I could always feel that calling, that something really familiar about it. So yesterday I got to sit with Black Otter, a Blackfoot drumming group yesterday, and I was a little uneasy at first, but I was like, just get in there and make that sound. Make the sound that is inside here. And so it's going to be a work in progress. It's when I think about sobriety or a cultural awakening, it's so brand new. It's so brand new, right? These are just really small moments in time. So going back to community is it's healing and allowing myself to feel them instead of suppressing it and just going, okay, just go with it. You know, quit trying to please someone else. Quit trying to fit in, conform to make someone else comfortable, right? And so when I go back to community, I'm just like, this is who I am. You can take it. That's up to you. If I make you uncomfortable, that's okay. If you make me uncomfortable, then I have to figure out why that is. I hope does that make sense? Yeah.
What does it mean to be two-spirit?
What does it mean for me? That's a long story, but there was always something different. I always knew that there was something unique. And even though I didn't know that word as a kid, I knew that I was different from other people. I could always, I always knew I was kind, you know? I always knew that I had a sense of fairness, that I wanted to know, okay, so what happened there? So what, to hear both sides, right? And so when they started using that word in the 90s, Two-Spirit, it kind of helped develop that, and then started researching it more. Well, what is that? And then recognizing that yes, and I won't attempt to say the Cree word for the two words that they have for Two-Spirit persons in Cree, as I'll butcher it. But what it means to me is that I identify that as a gift. Like we all have gifts, right? We're all born with something. And for me, that being born with a masculine and a feminist spirit also shows that balance. That balance is a gift, being able to see, to try to see things fairly. When someone's telling me, okay, well, what's the other person's story? But that deep empathetic side is what some may call a feminine spirit. But I believe that men have that too. That men have that too, but it shows up more as the emotional intelligence of women is documented as higher, and always has been, as there's always been that super nurturing right from in utero, right from that gift, that seed, from that gift, there's that nurturing thing. And so having that embodiment of that is very special to me as when I identify as Two-Spirit. For me, I see it as a gift and not as the word. And so it's hard for me to place into words, into language, just how special that feels for me, right? And just letting that unfold the way it has in my everyday life, right? And so, and then watching the youth, watching this movement awaken, whereas when I grew up, there was a lot of hate, a lot of fear, and they really wanted us to suppress. So watching this, not a movement, this taking back, creating spaces for ourselves in community, and going, yeah, this is where we belong, because that's the way it always was pre-contact, right? Because of colonization. We were also ripped away from our communities, much like women were ripped away from their communities and made to diminish that sense of belonging, right? And so that was the same with us, but now I'm going back to community on my terms, but also open to what does that look like from teachings, from those who know the teachings, as it's really a lost teaching, right? For many, but there are some elders out there who do know and share that on and know the story of us as these people who embody the spirits of both masculine and female, and female, yeah, absolutely. So it's a very special part to me. It's a big part of my identity, whereas before I suppressed it and made it, I really tried to conform, right? Really to fit in, so I wouldn't deal with the hatred, so I wouldn't have to. So I'm really suppressing my true nature. So it's a very special, it's a gift that I feed every day, if that makes sense.
Does.
Yeah,
Thank you.
feed my spirit, yeah.
What has been your most impactful experience as a speaker?
Is the feedback. Sometimes I do a lot of speaking with people who are non-Indigenous. They take a class at Bow Valley College called Indigenous Studies. And so through that, they have to go through the history, and that includes all of our history, including the residential school experience, and that's where I come in to talk. as an invited speaker for my friend Miriam Perry, but I've given this speak to the Elizabeth Fry Sage program over there. I've given it to energy company. Anybody that asks, I'll share that. Who asks and wants the knowledge, not as tokenism or as part of something, as a diversity program. I'll share it when it's asked in a good way. And so one of the most impactful things that happens to me is when I hear the feedback is talking about forgiveness. That story I shared about you, that, because a lot of people sit in that, right? They sit in that anger and they're not talking to somebody and they're missing out on that opportunity for connection, right? So for them, it's like one of the most impactful things. That and going, and then hearing that we always thought of it, what we do know, if we know anything at all about the residential schools, is that that this is a living example of that I am a living, so often we see black and white photos whenever they do a news story on us. Is it intentional? Maybe, because they want it to look like it's history, so they use black and white photos. They'll use people that are either really old. They won't use people that appear like me, myself. And then, so they don't make that connection. It's always treated like it's history, something that's in the past, when in fact, those impacts is still very much alive and still very relevant. So that's one of the most impactful things. When I get that feedback back, it's like, we didn't know, and now we can see a little bit more. So they can have a little more empathy for, the people that we see very outside this door in the library, right? We see the impacts of colonization. We see the negative impacts of residential schools right outside these doors, right outside of Bow Valley College. So when I hear that feedback, that I've sown that seed of, and so how that might influence their work is something that I shared that's very impactful for me. And that's something that I consider my responsibility, right? That's also, what is my role? What is my responsibility? And that's a part of it, is sharing that story. Maybe that's why I'm still alive. Maybe that's why I'm here, is to share that knowledge. Because so many didn't survive, right? So many are still in that state of hurt and not ready to share that. So maybe that's why I'm here. So one of the most incredible impacts is getting the feedback from the students, because most of them will write a paper on it, Or they'll come up to me in school and say, I just want to say thank you for this, and just make that moment personal, Thank you for taking the time. Because it's not only a story of residential school, it's a story of my ancestors. I am fourth generation residential school survivor. I'm also that journey through addiction, that journey through healing, through acknowledging everything to where we are today, right? And so they go, it helps them, whether they're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, on their healing journey, I guess. And it impacts them in a positive way. Whereas there might have been bias before, right? And confirmed bias, as so many people do have about our communities. Yeah.
What do you hope people's biggest takeaways are from your public speaking?
Just that, is that there is a reason. There is a reason that we are highly represented in the negative, in justice, in addiction and homeless, in missing and murdered, in all those. There's a reason, and that reason was those residential schools, was Impact, was the Indian Act, was 60 Scoop, and letting them use their own Rubik's Cube, because I do use that, and going, oh. And so there's a better understanding, and they're going to go out there in their fields. I'm in community studies, so that's early childhood education. So they're going to have a little more learning, if not an entire learning, at least a piece, and go, maybe that's why there's some, identify some of those reasons, maybe why Tom is not doing so well, or Jill is behavior is like this. Just a little bit of understanding, and so for me, that's what I see it as. how they see it. I hope a lot of them take something out of it. Not everybody will, right? Some people will just like, here we go again, right? But maybe somewhere along the road it'll go, I remember that guy saying that. I remember that. Or something will come up and they'll go, I remember that guy telling a story about that. Or sharing something about that experience. And even if it's not residential schools or Indigenous related, there's a commonality in abuse. There's a commonality in trauma and how we make sense of that if we can at the time. And so, yeah, that's how I hope, and perhaps that impact is received.
How can non-Indigenous better hold space for voices like yours?
Come to the table with clean hands. Anybody that wants to learn will come forth. When you're ready, come and ask. It's as simple as that. Come and engage with the community. We're a very welcoming collectivist culture. We're very welcoming and willing to share knowledge on ourselves and to celebrate and to laugh and share food and all that, right? How can they be willing to? Be willing to, and when you do it, make sure your intention is good. Make sure you're asking for information in a good way and not just because you have to do it as part of a program or to get that picture. To get that picture with the person with the headdress or the earrings or the person in the blanket, right? Oh, look, here we are. We're this great big bank and look at us. We're diverse. We do all this. Make sure that you're doing it for good reasons. Ask questions. Don't be scared to ask questions. We as Indigenous people are asking questions. That's been part of my journey is asking questions, but asking in a good way, finding that and giving permission to be wrong. Give yourself permission to be wrong, right? Just when they're ready to, when they want to know, and if it's authentic, it's there for you. There's so many ways to find out, right? You can find out about it through supporting Indigenous artists. You can find out about following young people like you, just don't be scared. We're not scary people. We're not those people in the movies, in these old black and white movies. We're not those people, you know. Just hear us laugh and hear that drum and hear that heartbeat and come, right? That's how I believe they can. Anybody that wants to. But that's with anything in right. You have to want it, right? Sobriety. We had to want it. Otherwise, it was never going to happen, right? That's the same with non-Indigenous people. If they want the information, if they want to understand, it's there. So, yeah, want it. Be intentional.
What does truth and reconciliation look like to you?
For me right now, truth is a personal journey. And for me, it's sharing. When I do my talks, when I do my things, I base it around a lot of truths, and I give people a lot of heads up. There will never be enough time in any day to share the full experience of that time in my life, right? The horrors of what happened in that school. So for me, when I share, that's the truth part. Because there is no reconciliation until you understand bits of that truth, right? Take it from somebody who's talking from the lens of a missing and murdered Indigenous person. Take it from the lens of someone, the various lens of someone who experienced these residential schools, who were adopted out of community, who were taken out of their community, people that were displaced from their lands, from the Métis people. Take all those, right? Take those and listen to those truths. Don't question it. What do we have to gain by making something up that we know, right? For me, that's the truth part right now. But I also have to share that knowledge in an authentic way, in a truthful way, with intention. When I give that talk, what is my intention for that day? Once again, what is my role? What is my responsibility? The way that talk looks each day is always going to be different. Who am I talking to? And when I talk, it always morphs into its own thing, right? So for me, that's the truth part. Truth has to be authentic and truthful within me in order for me to share it out there. But the biggest truth part of it, we're sharing with people, is that they have to recognize and acknowledge that these things happened. And that's the truth part of truth and reconciliation. Reconciliation is also highly personal. As I had to reconcile and continue to reconcile with myself, with my spirit, with my journey, right? And what that looks like. With my own family, with my community, I'm in a constant state of reconciliation. But also looking at those calls to action, the calls to justice from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous report, looking at them carefully, I thought, how do I place myself into that? How do I work into that? But for right now, reconciliation is really that reconciliation of self. And where do I fit in? So I'm really on that journey. And just being open to it. Because how can I ask somebody else to do it if I'm myself? I'm not on that journey as well, right? Yeah.
What do you think your younger self would say if they could see where you're at now?
Through my sober journey, through my healing journey, we'll call it that, I made relations with a beaver. It was at the deepest, darkest, lowest part of my life. I was really, really just struggling to stay alive at this time. My spirit was diminished. My physical was ready to, the pain was getting too much, and my body couldn't take much more. But on one day, about a year before I got sober, I was sitting on a river. I had left my former partner, and I was in just darkness. And as I sat there, I noticed something in the corner of my eye, and there was a beaver sitting over there. And in that moment, this relationship had started to develop. And in that moment, sitting there in the quiet, sizing each other up, He's just sitting there doing what beavers do, munching on river grass, and I'm sitting there just kind of lost. But in that moment, I felt it's going to be okay. That beaver came at different times in my life. When my uncle died, that night when I got violent, when I started asking why am I still so angry, that beaver came in, and in those moments and in that connection, it said it's gonna be okay. So I started, and that beaver, I still see that beaver, And but now I see that beaver sometimes when I'm having a good day or when I need permission for something. When I was going to start sharing that story in the talks that I give, I was laying down tobacco on the river, and it was wintertime, And it's just a few months ago, and sure enough, swimming along in the river, it's going to be okay. It's okay to do it. It's okay. So I got that permission to start sharing that story about that beaver, So, and when I share that story, I always think of that little boy. It used to be hard for me. It's still sometimes hard for me to look at myself as a little boy, But then I see him and I just say, what would I say to him? And I'll just say, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Just what that beaver told me. And it is okay. And it's going to be okay. There are going to be challenges. There's going to be hurt. There's going to be joy. And through all of that, it's just going to be okay. And that's what I tell him. Tell that little person, you're going to be okay.
What do you think your ancestors would say?
I think about them quite a bit, and I carry them with me. And each morning I'll think about a different one. And from the teachings I receive, I find more and more comfort. As before I thought I'm a disappointment to them. Before I understood what being that two-spirit had place in community. pre-contact. So for me, I would like to believe that they are proud, that I am an answer to any prayers that they may have had for the generations that was to come. That the role that I am to fill and the responsibilities that I carry, not only in name, not only as Two-Spirit, not only as an Indigenous person, that I am the answer to that prayer and the continuing answer to that prayer. I would hope that there's, in certain elders' teachings, they say we call them down. Each time we think about them, we call them down. So whenever I smudge in the morning, I can envision the ones that I did get to interact with, right? And then I always kind of imagine, the ones we see, our ancestors and the braids and the regalia and stuff like that. So I feel that presence, right, of my ancestors, of our ancestors. And I could become overwhelmed, not in pride, but in humility that I could be the answer to their prayers as well as my cousins, my mom, and my grandchildren, right? And so now, as someone who's working on being a good ancestor, I pray every day. And I pray for those that are going to come in 3 generations, and 4 generations, 7 generations, and I pray for them. And what I pray for them is that they know that it's going to be okay. That their journey maybe doesn't have to be so hard, but if it is, there's a reason, for it shapes us. Everything shapes us. And it certainly shaped me to be here today and to share a little bit about that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What advice would you give to someone looking to start a healing journey?
Be prepared. Ask yourself some really hard questions. Ask yourself, what is my role? Start with that. There's a reason you're still here. And that's what I tell them as well. I said, there's a reason. And there's always kind of a communal laugh, if I'm sharing with a group. And I'll say, do you ever ask yourself why you're still alive? Like, should you? Why am I still alive when I shouldn't be? Because we put ourselves in predicaments, right? Getting into a car, using this drug, but for some reason, we're not. So, as they're going on their healing journey, start asking those questions. Stop taking responsibility for all that hurt. You weren't responsible for the trauma, but now you have this responsibility to heal from it. That's the one thing we have in control of us, right? We can control how we respond to things now. And when you're ready, it's always got to be when you're ready, right? Because if you're not ready, you're going to go right back into that cycle. You're going to go right back into that washing machine. Be ready and be open and just be easy on yourself. Love yourself. Give yourself permission not to be perfect, to not have to fit in, to not have to conform. Just be comfortable with who you are and who you wake up with each day, because we are products of Creator, right? And we're not perfect. So why are you trying to be? So just go easy on yourself as you go through this journey, should you choose it. Some people may never be ready. But if you are, there's people out there that'll cross your path. People like you, people like myself. And there's a reason. Don't take that path crossing for granted, because there's a reason why we cross paths, right? And so, I always tell people whenever they're going off on their journey, I say, we'll meet again. And we'll meet again, and whatever that looks like. Because there's a reason why we cross paths. There's a reason why you and I cross paths at that fashion show, right? Here we are, we're intersecting once again. And somehow I knew that. Somehow I know I'll see some of the other people, right? Because we all kind of just went about our own thing. But that's just it. When you're ready, when you are ready, it's there. And if you're not ready, find something that'll bring you some kind of comfort, some kind of safety. If you're not ready, that's okay. There's still love. We still love you. How can we support you to keep you safe for right now? Let's not think about how hard things are going to be to try and heal or to access healing, right? And so just be present, want it, and when you're ready, it's there for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you for your time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I enjoyed this. It's always nice to connect and to transfer that energy, right? And so I hope you got something out of this today. I did. I watch the emotion. I watch the body language, and I was like, okay, so I'm vibing with that. And so, but the earrings, for me, it was the earrings today. I love these earrings. I kept on thinking, this is going to look so good on camera, these earrings.
Yeah.
So you got a good earring game.
Thank you.
But thank you for having me. I always consider it a blessing, eh? When I can use my voice effectively, because it wasn't always the case. When I first got sober, I couldn't speak for more than 5 minutes. I didn't know how. All my social skills had developed either under the oppressive acts of violence or through addiction. So my voice was a false voice. It wasn't authentic. So when I got sober, I didn't know how to socialize. I was 50 years old and I didn't know how to sit still. I didn't know how to communicate. I would be so awkward. But it was through education, and it was through community connection that I was able to find this voice and be able to talk. And now they can't shut me up.